So I probably heard about these intimidators. They obfuscate, they intimidate, they're intimidating, and they come, and if there's evidence, they'll take the evidence, or they'll try to take the evidence. They try to get the witnesses terrified to not talk. And I'd heard about these since probably the first time when I was investigating the Phoenix Lights case in the 90s, and I did a couple of films, covered a couple films on that whole thing. I heard about the first, visitation, real serious visitation of these so-called, men in dark suits.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd heard about it like a number of other times. I heard about it with 1950 with the McMinnville, Oregon case,
Right.
that she got a visit. It was Paul and Evelyn Trent. And Evelyn had talked about her husband was out of the town, and this guy showed up and rummaged through her hole from some unknown government agency. And that was 1950. Then I heard about it with Rex Heflin from, I think, Santa Ana, 65. He had a visit with these guys in suits, and I ignored that one, didn't report on it, didn't report on the 51, didn't report on the one from the Phoenix Lights case. And then I heard a number of other cases in the United States. Then I heard about some cases in Europe, didn't report on it.
Always American?
Yeah, always. Yeah, there's an unknown government agency in the U.S. Yeah, that has the ability to reach anywhere. Like I even interviewed a General Parviz Jafari from the 1970s UFO incident over Tehran, Iran. It's a fascinating case. And he told me, I was like, yeah, the next morning, like the encounter happened in the middle of the night. The next morning, a couple of men from the United States government, I don't know what agency they're from, they were there poking around, asking questions. Wow. I was like, really? And I didn't report on that. But then I was in Brazil, probably on and off for the last, 12, 14 years. But I was in Brazil, and it was probably 2013, maybe 2014. And I was interviewing the mother of two really important witnesses that came, according to them, within 10 feet of a live creature in broad daylight. And the mother talked about these men in suits that showed up at her house, very intimidating, very scary, and very just scary and intimidating. And they tried to persuade her to get her daughters to lie, and they didn't see what they said they saw, and all this stuff.
Money as well.
They offered a briefcase full of money, and that was it. I was like, okay, these guys exist. I've had enough hearing these stories. I'm going all in. I'm going to report on it, and I did.
That put you over the edge.
That put me over the edge.
Wow.
Yeah. Finally, after all those years, yeah.
You're like, enough of these guys.
Well, I knew it was a slippery slope, and I knew, like, reporting, like, if you look at the history of my investigations and my filmmaking, I had heard about Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Of course, I mentioned the Roswell incident, one of my first films, but in terms of like an alleged close encounter of the third kind, when you've got witnesses reporting entities, beings, creatures, whatever, connected to the craft, that to me was a slippery slope, and I just avoided it for over 20 years, probably 25 years, I don't know. And it was same with the MIB, because I just thought, like, I can't prove it. It just sounds so out there.
Yeah.
It just sounds kind of crazy.
It sounds cliche almost.
Sounds cliche, exactly. And so I finally said, oh, the hell with it. And then actually I reported on a lesser version in the phenomenon with the 1966 UFO landing at Westall Primary School.
Yeah.
Shane Ryan is very grateful for all the work he's done in that case. But that's when we got a hold of this science teacher named Mr. Greenwood, and he went silent for 50 years. In fact, when I arrived in Australia, people, even like the long-term UFO researchers, like, don't even bother. You'll never come forward.
Wow.
And then, so we found out he had a visit from men in suits, and they scared.
Was it Air Force?
Yeah, he wasn't sure. Like, two were in uniform, one was not in uniform, but they basically intimidated him and scared the bejesus out of him. He silenced him for 50 years.
Imagine.
Yeah. So anyway, but enough Men in Black. We can talk about. But it is interesting that they have this sort of omnipresence globally.
That is very interesting, in that it always seems to be American.
Yeah.
Because I had this discussion with some friends, and we were actually on a Discord, and we were talking about, is the Men in Black thing just solely a U.S. thing, because you hear about a lot of these cases and people are like, why is it always the U.S.? Why is it always the U.S.? Well, they kind of have agency over everything that revolves around crash. Everything. They show up everywhere. They showed up in Virginia. You know, they're retrieving these crafts in Italy. They're retrieving, you know, like all this around the world. Why wouldn't they also have feet on the ground? And then Calvine as well.
Yeah, it was amazing. That was a last minute development in the program, because quite honestly, I'd heard about the 1990 Calvine UFO case from Nick Pope years ago,
Right.
Well over 20 years ago, because I was like, every time we'd be having a beer together, I'd be like, Nick, come on, man, what was the best case here? And hands down, he would just like, there were these two guys hiking in Scotland. He never used the word Calvine. I don't believe he did when he told me, but he said these guys were hiking in Calvine, broad daylight, 5 or 6 prints of its diamond shaped, like disc diamond shaped craft with military. I was like, whoa, you saw that picture? He goes, yeah, man, we added a poster on the wall. So I like mildly chased after that case, because I kept saying to Nick, who was your predecessor? Like, what about people haven't retired? They wouldn't have thrown that picture away. He goes, well, at some point the poster was no longer on the wall at the MOD. I'm not sure. I said, well, they didn't throw it away. I can assure you that did not get thrown away. Somebody's got to have it. And I was pestering him for a long time. And then we cover that case, thank God, to David Clark, because David Clark was going through some redacted documents that were released through FOIA. I don't know what the British equivalent would be. And he saw this thing that said, so-and-so, the former RAF press officer, blacked out, in 1990. So who was the press officer in 1990? Craig Lindsay. Contacts him. And he managed to keep one of those prints. But so thanks to David Clark, we had a print.
Yep.
We had the only military, or I guess he would be military, Royal Air Force press officer, Craig Lindsay, who the only known person to have interviewed the witnesses. So we had him come on camera. We had the print. We had Nick Pope at the former UFO desk at the MOD talk about the case. The only thing we were missing was like, what about the witnesses? What about the people that took the photograph? Where are they? And at the last minute, this guy came forward, Richard Greaves, who worked with them in the kitchen.
The chef, or the kitchen guy.
And that's what it was like. That's when he was like, he started talking about these men that showed up in suits. I was like, oh my God, here they are again.
Yeah.
Starts talking about that. And I was like.
And they had a chauffeur, which I thought was interesting.
Yes.
The chauffeur never got out of the car. He stayed in the car, and the other guys stood in the rain as if it didn't bother them.
Hissing rain. He said it was
bizarre.
Hissing rain sent out there. But I said, oh, that's what they told you? He goes, no, mate, I was there when they rolled up. So you're a witness to that. Yes. And I love the way he describes it, because he's like, I swear to my great
grandchildren.
Yes. Grandchildren. Yes. So funny.
I know that was almost harder for me to decipher than the Portuguese in the other documentary.
Yeah. So funny.
Thick Scottish accent.
So one little side note that I'll share here is that, am I allowed to use like
expletives?
Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
So Richard Greaves, he'd never really given I would say on camera, or like he'd done one written interview, so written only, so no voice. And they took one photograph of him, but he'd never really given a real interview like what he did with us. And he kept putting it off, and I was approaching the end of production. I mean, the film was a wrap, and I was like just putting the finishing touches on, and I kept contacting him because he agreed to do it through David Clark. And he kept putting it off, and then he just vanished. And I contacted David Clark, and I was like, God, Richard Greaves' testimony is going to be so important. Like, did I pester him? Did I upset him? Maybe I pushed him too much. Like, David's like, no, man, it took me 2 years to get a written out of him. So that's kind of his nature, And so one night he finally calls, and he'd had a couple of pints, and he's like, I'm ready. I think he was obviously clearly nervous from the whole experience. I'm ready. Well, he uses a lot of expletives, and it was a brilliant interview. I remember it was Lance Mungia, it was Donnie in the room, it was my sister, myself, and I think we had one other person. I'm trying to remember in the ed room that night. And he calls, and we get the whole thing. We just capture it on camera, and we're going through the interview, and he's like, the fucking why is a fucking ghost? And I made fucking poached eggs. They made toast, and he's like, so at the end of the interview, I call my buddy Jim Martin, and who I'm working with on the film, and I said, Jim, man, this guy is a really good interview, but he kind of says fuck a lot. He goes, and Jim's like, okay, well, how many times does he say it? I was like, ooh, a lot. He's like, what, a couple times? I was like, no, more than a couple, a lot. How many fucks can we include in the movie? He goes, God, I would say a couple of fucks. I would say 2, maybe 3. I was like, in the whole movie, he goes, yeah, anything more than that. And yeah. So
he ate up your entire fuck budget for the for the program.
It was so funny.
So funny.
So I went into the sound engineer, this guy at Juniper Post. He's great, at Ben Zarian. And Ben's like, well, what's going on? I was like, well, you might have to beep, because I'm only really allowed just a couple of fucks, and this guy is, he's very passionate, and he's obviously been sitting on the story for a long time. And Ben's like, well, how many fucks can, are okay?
Yeah.
Like, it was like, we were having this conversation, right? And it's like, well, I think 3, maybe 2, 3, 4 at the most.
He's like, I'll write a number down and slide it towards you. What do you think?
So he's like, well, okay, well, I'll just beep them out. And so he starts beeping them out, and then we listen to it. We're like, oh man, that doesn't sound good. He goes, you know what? Let me get in there and do some microscopic surgery. I think I can just get a couple of those fucks out. So we'll only have a couple. So I said it once during the interview, and then he said it a couple times, but it was really funny.
Yeah.
We're having this very serious conversation about like how many fucks can we get away with in a movie? Like, I think 3 was the magic number.
Meanwhile, this guy's like, yeah, the Men in Black showed up.
Yes.
A perfect situation to use the F word, by the way.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. He was out there. Were fucking spooks.